De'Aaron Fox versus Ja Morant. It's been a comparison. It's been a debate, really, for all 2 seasons that Morant has been in the NBA. And while Fox has, for the most part, dominated their head-to-head matchups, a lot of people side with Morant over De'Aaron in terms of who's the better overall talent. On today's Locked On Kings podcast, I'm going to be joined by Locked On Grizzlies host Shawn Coleman. He and I are going to hash this out a little bit. We're going to look at Fox versus Morant, compare their head-to-head numbers. We're going to look at their individual numbers. We're going to look at advantages that Morant has over Fox and vice versa, what makes them so effective, and try and figure out who is the better player. Maybe one of us can change the other's mind. It's all on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
The fantastic voice of PA announcer Scott Moak introing the Locked On Kings podcast as always. Welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of the Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I've been a Sacramento Kings, Sacramento sports media member for the last 7 years, formerly in radio, now in television, and this will be season number 8 for me covering your Sacramento Kings. Very much looking forward to hopefully a big leap for De'Aaron Fox, another major step for him in his career, really going from a average to good scorer to the Kings' leading scorer and star last season. Now, can he build even more upon that to become not just an all-star in the NBA, but the star player of a playoff team? Those expectations are heavy on the shoulders of Fox for this season. As for Ja Morant in Memphis, high expectations for him as well, especially after his incredible performance in the play-in tournament where he, I think he set a franchise record for playoff scoring for the Memphis Grizzlies in that game. He's gotten that stage that De'Aaron Fox hasn't gotten. And of course, Shawn Coleman and I are going to discuss that today. I did mention, though, PA announcer Scott Moak, who intros the Locked On Kings podcast for me, a cool story that came out a while ago. I don't know how much you're into gaming, and NBA 2K22 just came out, and Scott Moak, as well as the rest of the PA announcers in the NBA, are featured in the game. So you'll hear Scott Moak's voice every time you score a basket with the Sacramento Kings in the game. So that's pretty cool. Appreciate Scott Moak. Absolutely love Scott Moak, friend of the show. And it's always great to have his voice on the introductions. But I'm not going to waste any time because my conversation with Shawn, it's a long one. It's going to dominate the podcast here today. I really think you're going to enjoy De'Aaron Fox versus Ja Morant. Who is the better player? Matt George here of the Locked On Kings podcast, joined by Shawn Coleman from the Locked On Grizzlies. And Shawn, I am here to finally get you and Grizzlies fans to admit that De'Aaron Fox is a better player than Ja Morant. You think you can do that for me today?
To an extent. First off, hello, Matt George. How are you? Long time no see. And to all you and your Sacramento fans, hope you get Ben Simmons. Well, that's a conversation for another time. But first off, congratulations to you and your family on being a father. But second off, yes, individually, De'Aaron Fox was better than Ja Morant last year. However, I will say I think Ja Morant had the season that De'Aaron Fox wishes he had.
We're going to dive into this because, all joking aside, for some reason, De'Aaron and Ja have been compared really since Ja got halfway through his rookie season. And it's been not just a comparison, it's been a who would you rather have? So much so that this has gotten on NBA talk shows and even gotten reactions out of De'Aaron Fox. I don't know if Ja Morant has ever reacted to anything like this. And it's become suddenly a debate between two franchises and two fan bases. Now, of course, Kings fans and myself are typically going to side with De'Aaron. Memphis Grizzlies fans and yourself, Shawn, are typically going to side with Ja Morant. And that's okay. And instead of this just being like a first take screaming match about why each player is better, we're really going to look at some of the numbers, how eerily similar these two players are in a lot of ways, where each player has the advantage over the other, and do our best to try and figure out which one is better objectively in different areas? Because different players have different legs up. Ja Morant certainly has more experience in some areas of postseason basketball than De'Aaron Fox has, and De'Aaron Fox has overall more experience in the NBA than Ja Morant has, so that's going to affect some things. But overall, Shawn, when talking about these two players and talking about what each franchise has as their guy, their cornerstone, their scoring guard, both are in pretty good hands.
Exactly. And that's the thing that kind of is the first area where I think that you would compare the two, Matt, is that for two franchises who were in the midst of really needing a player to the level of what Fox is and what Ja is, Memphis has never had a talent like Ja Morant, with the upside Ja Morant has. It's been a while, probably nearly 2 decades, I would say, since the Kings have had someone who has a ceiling that De'Aaron Fox showed he had this year. So you have the franchise cornerstone aspects of things when it comes to young point guards. That's the comparison. You've also got the player profiles. Two players who are naturally athletic, to the advantage of they've got the physical advantage against 85 to 90% of the guards they're typically facing. With De'Aaron, it's the speed and just the quickness of how he operates. With Ja, it's the functional athleticism. And then the other thing that really makes them compare is, though they are as strong as they are, in terms of their natural games and natural physical ability, it's the clear weakness on offense. What's going to take them to the next level of being maybe top 5 point guards in the league? The inconsistent shot. Can they improve that? So on those 3 levels, I think that's why makes a lot of logical sense to compare both of them early in their careers.
And for this conversation today, there's 2 areas that we're going to look at things. We're going to look at statistics and we're going to look at the eye test, because you can't measure everything that a player does just based off of a box score. But when looking at the statistics for these 2 players, there are some clear advantages for De'Aaron Fox, which we would expect in terms of overall numbers, because Fox has played 2 more seasons than Ja Morant has in the NBA. So when numbers are similar, it almost gives the edge to Ja Morant right there, because he has less experience and is younger than De'Aaron Fox is. However, at the same time, too, statistics can skew in favor of Ja Morant because there's not as big of a sample size. He hasn't had to do it for as long as De'Aaron Fox has. And really, if you look at Fox's overall numbers and you take away his inconsistencies and his just learning the game in his first season and maybe a little bit of his second season, figuring out how to be a dynamic scorer that he now is, you take those numbers away, his numbers are way, way higher, which we're going to jump into. But Shawn, overall, the numbers between these 2 players, when you're just talking about their individual numbers overall, are strikingly similar. You look at the per game numbers overall throughout their careers, and Ja Morant actually has De'Aaron in scoring by 0.2. Their shooting percentages are very similar. De'Aaron has a very slight edge from 3-point range. What's crazy is both shoot or average the exact same field goal amounts per game, 6.7, and Ja Morant averages 0.1 more field goals attempted per game than De'Aaron. So those speak to, in their careers, how similar they've been. But you pointed out to me their per 36 minutes and how not just similar, almost dead on they are, if you want to share some of those.
Yeah, in terms of, and of course, we're looking at basically De'Aaron Fox has double the sample size that Ja Morant has. And there's been a much higher variance from the floor that De'Aaron started at to the ceiling he's reached versus the level that Ja Morant's been on, which basically evens out as to being them similar players. On a per 36 basis, both average 20.9 points per game. Ja Morant averages 4.5 rebounds, while De'Aaron Fox averages 4 rebounds. They both take 16. I think De'Aaron Fox takes 16.7 shots per 36 minutes. Ja Morant 16.5, and De'Aaron Fox shoots 46.3% to Ja Morant's 45.8. So you basically, when it comes to the scoring ability of both players, they're about as similar as 2 players can get in terms of their scoring rates when they're on the court. Now, if you go outside of scoring, you still keep them kind of on the same level, but in different ways. De'Aaron Fox, his ability to create turnovers and play defense. He's a better 2-way talent than Ja Morant. But I do think that the offensive ceiling, the offensive value with Ja is a bit higher, because I do think that there's a relevant difference between his ability to elevate his teammates' play and his playmaking ability over De'Aaron Fox's. That is not an insult to either player. It's just a type of player profile. Though they're strikingly similar with how they score, outside of that, they differ a bit. But at the end of the day, you come back to both players being highly effective players for both the Grizzlies and the Kings.
We know there are a lot of Kings fans and Memphis Grizzlies fans listening to this, obviously, and it's hard for you to remove your bias. I understand, and maybe your mind is already made up, but I want to challenge you to really listen to this conversation and look at these numbers, look at these two players, take that bias out of it, and objectively answer two questions. One, and this first one might be easy for every fan base. Who would you rather have on your roster right now? I think both fan bases are going to stick with their guys. But number two is, who would you start your franchise with if it was a clean slate day one? None of these players were on your roster, and this is your first pick between those two guys, because those are very different questions. Do you go younger with Ja Morant, even though his numbers are eerily similar? Do you take the upside that De'Aaron Fox showed in his last season? Be sure to let us know. Reach us both on Twitter. We would love to hear your answers to those questions. But then we talk about the head-to-head numbers, Shawn, when these two players have played. And I want to make sure that I'm being, again, removing as much bias as possible and being as fair as possible. I look at these head-to-head numbers, and this doesn't surprise me because it looked this way in the eye test as well. De'Aaron Fox has dominated the one-on-one matchups so far between himself and Ja Morant. Am I being fair there, or am I undercutting and underselling Ja Morant in the Memphis Grizzlies a little bit?
I don't think you're underselling Ja Morant and the Memphis Grizzlies. I think you may be underselling De'Aaron Fox a bit. De'Aaron Fox has kicked our ass when he's played us over the past 2 years. The reason why if I remember correctly, towards the end of last season, De'Aaron Fox didn't play in either of those games, or at least I think he played in one of those games, in which we came and played Sacramento back-to-back, but he wasn't at 100%. Regardless, when De'Aaron Fox has been on the court, the Sacramento Kings have been the better team when facing the Memphis Grizzlies head-to-head. And it's not in any way, shape, or form an insult to Ja Morant. One of the weaknesses of his game right now is his defense, especially on-ball defense. Is that something that ever becomes a clear strength compared to the rest of the NBA? I don't know. It may not be. But one thing that he has struggled in is that facing players that are at his athleticism, or maybe even a bit higher in Fox's case, that's not an ideal matchup for Ja Morant. So Ja Morant's been the guy who's been primarily tasked with taking on De'Aaron Fox. The results don't surprise me. Now, as time goes on, and this Grizzlies team's coming off a top 10 season, I would venture to say that their matchups may be closer going forward. But yes, if you go by pure head-to-head numbers, De'Aaron Fox certainly has the advantage.
Well, when the Kings and the Grizzlies play, you'll be able to bet on that game on betonline.ag. And I know I would put money on the Kings winning and put money on De'Aaron Fox outperforming Ja Morant. But right now on BetOnline, it's football season. It's that time of the year again. All eyes now turning to football as teams are back on the gridiron to start the NFL season. As always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action you could possibly want. Get all the updated odds, props, and contests, including the online's biggest $500,000 NFL mega contest and the world's largest $200,000 NFL survivor contest, open now at BetOnline. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 100% welcome bonus. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports, not just NFL football, of course, but from football to basketball, boxing, right to your even favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait and take advantage of all the great offers available for the 2021 season at BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live. You have another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for all the good other extra stuff you need. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all that entertainment that you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together in one place. It's called Direct TV Stream, and it brings you live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. Now, I know what you're thinking. Direct TV, I don't like those contracts. I don't like being set into those price points. You don't have those. There is no annual contract, and you no longer have to juggle remotes and no need to buy any other device ever again. DirecTV Stream, no contracts, available for you right now. Get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible devices required. Content varies by package. Assuming these numbers in front of me are accurate, 5 meetings between the two. And the Kings in those 5 meetings have a 3-2 record against Morant and the Grizzlies, which is not blow your socks off impressive. But when you're looking at the individual numbers between these two, and remember, the majority of the minutes that they're playing have been against each other, which is what everybody wants. When the Memphis Grizzlies and Kings are playing, you don't want to see Tyrese Halliburton on Ja Morant. You want to see Ja versus Fox. And thankfully, for the most part, we have gotten that. And in all 5 games, Fox has outscored Morant. In all 5 games, Fox has out-rebounded Morant. They're actually tied with assists. Both each have 2 games where they've outscored the other in assists, and then had the same stat in one of the games, which is pretty crazy. And then in all 5 games, De'Aaron has defensively been better, had more steals. But when you look at the scoring between the two, Fox's scoring is 24.6 points per game in those games against Morant, and Morant's numbers are still impressive, but 18.2. So that's a pretty significant gap. What's interesting, though, to your point that you talked about earlier, is Morant as a facilitator. Where Morant has the edge over Fox is as a passer. He averages 6.8 assists to Fox's 6.2. So not a massive gap, but that speaks to what you're talking about. The reason why the Kings only have a 3-2 record, even though Fox has dominated the individual matchup with Ja Morant, is that when Morant wasn't scoring, he was still able to facilitate and help his teammates win, which is also why many argue, and we saw last season, the Memphis Grizzlies are a better team than the Sacramento Kings are.
Yeah, and I'll first off start by saying this. If y'all want to put Tyrese Halliburton on Ja when we face the Kings, you are more than welcome to. I am sending this out as a request to Luke Walton. Let Halliburton guard Morant. All kidding aside, we'll put Dylan on Fox. We like that matchup. No, all kidding aside, no, you hit the nail on the head. And that's the other thing about it that I think also stands out about the potential upside between these two players. You know, we talked about it before we recorded this show, Matt. De'Aaron Fox probably right now has the ability to more consistently perhaps take over games, or at least in the early part of last season, take over games as a scorer. And it was needed because that's how the Kings won games. They won games by being able to outscore their opponents. That's nothing on Fox. It's just, that's a weakness. Defense is a weakness of the roster. With Ja, he got better as the season went along. Several of the times Ja has scored more than 30 points in his career, it's been against higher quality teams because those higher quality defenses really limited other players outside of Ja from playing offense. So Ja had to take over as the ultimate scorer. What hasn't correlated well with wins for us. With us, it's when Ja can balance being a good scorer as well as being someone that can be a playmaker. But when Ja needs to step up as a scorer, he showed 2 great opportunities to do that. The playing game against Golden State at Golden State to get to the playoffs, game 2 to almost steal a second game against Utah in Utah. So Ja has the ability to step up and be that ultimate scorer, that unstoppable scorer that the Grizzlies need, but he also can balance it with playmaking, so you may not see it as frequently as you did with De'Aaron Fox last season.
When it comes to the eye test, there's a lot of things that you can look at when it comes to these two players. I mean, you could talk about an area that Ja Morant has experienced in just 2 seasons that Fox has not gotten to yet, which is the postseason, air quotes, technically. I mean, Ja Morant and the Memphis Grizzlies last season made the play-in tournament. The Kings would have loved to make the play-in tournament. Ultimately, they didn't. A lot of that also had to do with some injuries to the team, and unfortunately De'Aaron Fox getting COVID-19 at the end of last season. But we can't hold that against Ja Morant. He has gotten his team to at least the play-in tournament, and when he did get to opportunity to perform on that stage, he absolutely shined, averaging 30 points per game during that play-in tournament, which, I mean, that speaks to Ja Morant's ability to step up as that major scorer in those big moments, just like De'Aaron Fox stepped up and proved that he could be that major scorer for the Sacramento Kings. And when Fox did step up in Sacramento, the Kings went on big winning streaks. Both stretches where Fox won Player of the Week, the Kings won 8 out of 9 games. Unfortunately, they followed that up with 9-game losing streaks both times, which is just insane to talk about. But what we've talked a lot about here in Sacramento, I'm curious your opinion on this, is, of course, we want to see Memphis and Ja in a 7-game series. I'd love to see the Grizzlies and the Kings going at each other in a 7-game series. But if Fox gets the stage, like Ja Morant got last year, to perform, Fox is going to do what Ja Morant did, maybe, and then some. I'm curious your thoughts on De'Aaron getting that stage and how Ja Morant took that stage and elevated himself to that next level.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see if you match up the Grizzlies versus the Kings at some point in time in the near future. I think one of the things that it'll certainly be with the way that the two teams are going on trajectory-wise, it would be with Memphis in the top 4 of the West and the Kings in the bottom 4. That's not meant as an insult. It's just the fact that the Grizzlies have they've had more success under Ja than the Kings have under De'Aaron Fox. But if they both were to match up against each other, the question that comes down to me is, what's the resourcefulness on offense for De'Aaron versus what it is for Ja? If Ja gets stopped, and it's not likely you're going to stop him, you can limit him a bit, especially if his shot's not there. But if Ja gets stopped, how is he going to be able to make up for it by making his teammates better? It's his passing. It's his ability to set up the defense, his ability to help the Grizzlies turn defense into offense. Ja's resourcefulness is certainly there in terms of creating for others. With De'Aaron Fox, you could argue right now he's a more resourceful individual scoring than Ja is. But even to that extent, if the Grizzlies, who are a very good defensive team, they're going to likely, especially if they play back-to-back games against the Kings, they're going to be able to limit De'Aaron Fox. Can De'Aaron Fox step up and be that ultimate playmaker to elevate his teammates to get wins? Does he have that ability? I'm not going to say I'm an expert because I don't follow the Kings that much, but does he have that ability? I'm sure it's there. But is it fair to question him having the ability more than you question Ja? Certainly. So right now, I think if they put a head-to-head matchup together, I would trust Ja more than I would De'Aaron Fox because of Ja's ability outside of his own ability to elevate his teammates' play than De'Aaron's.
See, this is where we really start to differentiate then, because I don't know if it's possible to even stop De'Aaron Fox. I think Fox's biggest limitations are upon himself, and that's something that he talked about at the end of last season, was he knows that if the Kings are going to be a good team to ever get to a point that Memphis got to last year and beyond, hopefully both these teams making the actual playoffs and not just the play-in, if the Kings are ever going to get there, Fox has to be at minimum good. There cannot be any fair or fine games for De'Aaron Fox anymore. And especially on that stage, I expect the bare minimum that you would get out of De'Aaron Fox is good. I don't know if Memphis, as good as they are defensively, I don't know if you can do anything to stop De'Aaron, especially if he's getting more confident with shooting the basketball. But now if Fox does have a bad scoring game or a slow scoring night, he does have the potential to be a solid playmaker, and I think to be close to, if not at Ja's level as a playmaker. The thing is, though, will the Kings look for that from him now that they have Tyrese Halliburton, who's a primary ball handler, facilitator, who's playing alongside him, not to mention Davion Mitchell, which we don't know what his role is going to be as a guard. So first off, the Kings don't necessarily lean on one guard like the Suns do on Chris Paul to be their go-to facilitator. But if they were, I think that they would lean more Tyrese Halliburton over De'Aaron Fox in that setting, which kind of fuels into your point that that's more of Morant's game. But I don't know if I would go as far as to say that if those two teams were to meet and have back-to-back matchups, that the Grizzlies would be able to make the correct adjustments to completely stop De'Aaron. I don't know if that's possible based off of what he's shown last year. Now, is he at like LeBron James or Giannis Antetokounmpo status? Absolutely not. But Fox has shown with his ability to now shoot and stretch his game outside that even if you're cutting off lanes to the basket, he can still be an effective scorer.
And that actually, that goes back to the point that I had made about right now. You maybe could make the argument that in terms of pure scoring ability, De'Aaron Fox right now may be better than Ja Morant. But the other side to that is this, is that may actually fall into the Grizzlies' hands as well. They may not be able to limit or stop Fox, but if they don't, what they can then do, and this takes it away from Ja and De'Aaron, if you want Fox to take over as a scorer, let him. The Grizzlies are a good enough defensive team, in my opinion, to limit others from adding to what Fox can do to win the game. The difference, in my opinion, Matt, between Ja and De'Aaron is De'Aaron can be that ultimate scoring monster if he needs to. Ja can do that as well. But even if the other team gets the idea of, okay, let Ja be Ja, we'll stop the other guys, I think Ja has a higher ceiling of overcoming that strategy to still set up his teammates and elevate their games, even if he is being that scoring monster. I think that he can do that at a higher level than De'Aaron Fox may be able to. So that's the reason why I compare them, is because I do think ultimately Ja is more balanced, is more naturally intelligent when it comes to that type of things because he focuses more on it. I'm not saying that De'Aaron doesn't, but Ja is it was looked at as being an unbelievable playmaker coming into the league. Now his scoring and playmaking ability balance, I think that combination with him is a bit higher, or at least has a higher ceiling going forward than De'Aaron's does.
And I think that leads perfectly into a part of this conversation that is necessary to have, even though we're talking about individual players and comparing two players. Supporting cast is such an important part of this conversation. They're not necessarily going to give either player the edge over the other. And correct me if I'm wrong, but when looking at these two rosters, I think it's fair to say that in terms of names, the Kings have the sexier roster. But in terms of a better team, Memphis has proven that they have the better roster just based off of how they've performed so far. And that weighs in to this conversation to where I don't know if I trust the Sacramento Kings team to be able to come together and support Fox when he's having an off night, or compliment Fox in all the ways he's needed to be complimented, like we've seen Memphis compliment Ja Morant, to where Ja can have that 30-point performance in the playoffs when the Memphis Grizzlies absolutely need him to. But on other nights, they can gear back to his 18 points per game or 19 points per game average and allow him to facilitate, and that still leads to a Memphis Grizzlies win. That's an advantage that Morant has with Memphis that I don't know Fox has. It's actually, in fact, I know Fox doesn't have that advantage in Sacramento because he needs to score close to 30 points a game, or he needed to last year for this Kings team to be able to win consistently.
Yeah, in terms of individual offensive upside, when you have players like a Buddy Hield, a Harrison Barnes, of course, a Tyrese Halliburton, you've got those individual offensive players who can, create their own shot at pretty good abilities for their size, and they can play good offense. But do they consistently play together as a team on offense? Or do they consistently, especially play together as a team on defense? I think that's fair to question. But that's an area where the Grizzlies, I think, are better than the Kings. They naturally just have players, they're featured players. When you compare a Dylan, a Kyle, a D'Anthony Melton to other similar players on the Kings roster, the defensive upside for the Grizzlies players is far superior, in my opinion. But also the reason why, though the Grizzlies roster may have more defensive upside while the Kings has more offensive upside, that's where Ja comes into play. He's the connection that can allow for those players that are good defensively to be better offensively. And I think that's why the Grizzlies have reached a level under Ja that the Kings have not necessarily had under De'Aaron Fox. Now, if we want to solve both teams' problems and swap D'Anthony Melton for Tyrese Halliburton, that's a conversation we can have. That's a conversation we could have for another time. But all joking aside, I do think that one of the things that really stands out about the difference between these two teams, it's not necessarily Ja and De'Aaron, like there's a significant difference between them overall as talents. I think where Ja is his strongest, and the fact that the Grizzlies have a roster that is better in terms of two-way production, I think that stands out for the Grizzlies' favor versus the Kings with De'Aaron Fox.
Today's Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you as always by our friends over at Rock Auto. And with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand that their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers. You have access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. You can save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why would you choose to spend 30, 50, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? Here's an example. A Honda Odyssey fuel pump is $353 from a chain store, $216 from Rock Auto. And I've experienced this savings myself. I had to order some new parts for my car, including a fuel pump, and I saved over $150 on that part alone. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution for your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now, see all the parts available for your car or truck, and write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so they know that we sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. And Locked On Kings is brought to you by our friends over at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the planet. All their flavors, absolutely delicious. Mint brownie is the best one, but they also have flavors like coconut, raspberry, double chocolate, salted caramel. All these bars are covered in 100% chocolate. They're soft, they're easy to chew, and most importantly, they're healthy for you. 17 to 18 grams of protein, calories ranging from 130 to 180, only 4 to 5 grams of sugar, and only 4 to 5 grams of net carbs. Amazing flavors, all tasty, all healthy. You can go on to built.com right now and order a mixed box, try all these different flavors. They'll send you 2 of each, and then you can pick your favorite flavors. And when you order another box, you just pick the flavors that you want. Like I make sure I have a ton of mint brownie bars sent to me every other week. Go to built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your order. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. I have a couple tough questions that just popped into my mind. If the Kings and Grizzlies combined rosters, meaning we could pick 16 players to be on a team out of both these teams, they're now the Sacramento Grizzlies or the Memphis Kings. Who is Batman and who is Robin? Is De'Aaron the Batman and Morant Robin? Is Morant the sidekick to Fox right now, or vice versa in your mind? Because I can make arguments to both.
Ja's Batman, De'Aaron's Robin.
Okay, why?
Because Ja has the ability to impact games at higher levels on offense. He can impact games at higher levels offensively in multiple ways than De'Aaron can. And when it comes to you talking about a Robin and that Batman Robin scenario, a two-way player is certainly nice to have. But that value defensively probably does not carry as much value, in my opinion, as having a multiple, resourceful offensive game like Ja does. While De'Aaron may be the go-to scorer at times, overall, I think whose hands would you rather have the ball in crunch time? The upside is more with Ja as Batman than as De'Aaron.
See, and I knew when asking this question that there's no way that we were going to come to an agreement with this, just like I know there's no way either fan base is going to come to an agreement with this. And it also speaks to, like we've talked about, how similar these two players are, because I feel like I can make almost the same argument in Fox's favor over Morant, just with Fox's ability he showed last year. And more consistently, I felt, than Ja Morant. Fox showed last year that when he needed to take over, when he needed to do what a superstar does in the NBA, he did it. Now, Morant showed that on the play-in tournament level and blew all of our minds. So not taking that from Ja, away from Ja at all. I've just personally seen, and that now I also watch more Kings basketball, I've just personally seen Fox do it more. And like we've talked about in head-to-head matchups between the two players, Fox has been a better overall player than Ja has, just when the two have played together or played against each other. So that's where I would go there. But in the end, I know that tough question was more going to be a you versus me type argument. The other tough question that I have, though, and I think this is more broad and more open for legitimate discussion and less debate, is when both of these players do take over games, right? When Ja takes over the way he does, or when Fox takes over the way he does, who is more unstoppable in your mind? Because I've seen Fox be unstoppable, and I've also seen Fox be stoppable. I've also seen Fox, in a way, stop Ja Morant. But when I watched Ja play in that Memphis game, I saw him hit shots that there's nothing you could do on the planet to stop that, and that was on a bigger stage. So that's where I think this is more open to discussion versus debate.
No, and I go back, and I don't mean to be limited on my answers, and I also don't mean to in any way, shape, or form go back to the same point, but it's the word resourcefulness, is that I understand that De'Aaron Fox, you could make an argument that he may be more unstoppable as a scorer than Ja Morant, but that potentially could play into the defensive's hands more easily, because you could either just let De'Aaron Fox operate and not let anybody else score, or if that's all you got, you can attempt to contain Fox as much as you can. With Ja Morant, as you mentioned, and on the levels that he's done it, against Golden State, against the best team in the NBA in the playoffs on their home court in Utah, if Ja Morant is wanting to score, he'll get the job done. He was one of the best fourth quarter players in the NBA his rookie year, obviously showed what he could do on a higher stage than Fox or Morant have been on combined. He showed that he could do what he could do, setting the Grizzlies franchise record for points scored. If Ja wants to take over as an ultimate scorer, he can. But which player is more comfortable going to another part of their offense to add significant value? Ja's playmaking ability, I think, is much more trustworthy than what De'Aaron can do in that sense. And so that's why I still will take Ja. But it also comes back down to, what do you value? In this question, who do you want? The better individual scorer right now, or the person that has the better combo of scoring and playmaking? If it's the scoring upside, it's De'Aaron Fox. If it's the balance, it's Ja. Going back to the first question, it's a matter of what you prefer. Do you want the bigger sample size of De'Aaron Fox, or do you want the higher platform that Ja showed it on? So that's why you can get different answers on these questions. Two very good questions.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is two different levels of unstoppable. And unstoppable doesn't just have to be from a scoring standpoint. It can be from stick with me with these comparisons here because they're not completely accurate, but I'm trying to make it make sense to people. De'Aaron Fox.
I agree with where you're going. By the way.
De'Aaron's level of unstoppable is the same on the Giannis Antetokounmpo level of unstoppable. Not that they're the same player, but when Fox wants to get to the basket and Fox wants to score, there's almost nothing that you can do to stop him short of fouling him and sending him to the line, which has been one of his biggest weaknesses. With Ja Morant, I almost attribute it in a way to like the Chris Paul level of unstoppable without the defense. But Ja can score just like Chris Paul can score, but Ja can also facilitate the way that Chris Paul can make everybody around him look like a superstar. How many big men has Chris Paul gotten major contracts? DeAndre Jordan, Clint Capella. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So those are the different levels of unstoppable that I think we're talking about, and which complements both players and just continues to this, I think, unanswerable conversation. If you put the bias in, it's easy for us to choose. But if you take the bias out and you're just looking at these two players, have no interest rooting wise in these two players and are staring at them, I don't know how you could choose one over the other with any kind of supreme confidence.
No, and it makes sense. And the thing that I'll say to that is this, is that, again, we're not saying that Ja or De'Aaron are on the level of a Chris Paul or Giannis. It's very unlikely either one of those players will get there. I will say that on my end, and again, it may be biased, it may be whatever, just because of what I've seen from Ja, if you were to ask me between De'Aaron Fox and Ja Morant, which player is more capable of needing to be Giannis like when he needs to and needing to be Chris Paul like when he needs to, I think the answer is Ja. Whereas I think with De'Aaron Fox, if you want the closest you can get to a Giannis level right now, it's De'Aaron Fox. So I think that's the way to put it. Not trying to start a debate. I really want to yell at you right now, but we're not going to do that. But at the end of the day, I think that that's an excellent way to put it. Is it the ultimate scorer or the ultimate combo of playmaking / scoring? Who's going to have the ability to do both in crunch time? I think the upside for both is certainly there for both Fox and Ja, and I think that we can both create more than logical arguments to support one or the other. But Ja's the right answer.
And the last thing on that is, I disagree, but the last thing on that too is this is where we talk about the different variables like supporting cast, where, like we said earlier, I think De'Aaron has to be Giannis for the team to win versus Ja can be the passive isn't the right word, because to be a facilitator, you're not passive, even if you're passing the ball. Ja can take a back seat more on scoring and can pass more and set up his teammates more, and that team can still win. Versus if De'Aaron takes that approach, I think the Sacramento Kings are losing, which is an advantage that Ja has over De'Aaron in a lot of ways, but you can't necessarily hold that against either player. The last thing I wanted to talk about, though, is personality. And this is where maybe passive comes into play a little bit more. Is De'Aaron is always and has always been a lead by example type player. There have been frustrations with myself and Kings fans to where we almost would like to see more dog in De'Aaron, to where he is not afraid to pull someone aside. And maybe he does this privately, but he certainly won't do it publicly, and get in their face and say, look, this is unacceptable. And it's, when he's played on a team that was as bad defensively as the Kings were last year, you'd almost expect De'Aaron can and needs to be better consistently defensively. And two, you would want De'Aaron as the leader of that team to hold his teammates accountable. He's more of a leader by example. Versus when I watch Ja Morant, and you can speak to this better than I can, I see someone who is passionate, and Fox is passionate too. When Fox is a big dunk, he'll yell, and if you're jawing at Fox, he'll go right back at you. But when I look at Ja Morant, I see a established leader, one by example, but also a vocal locker room leader. Am I accurate there?
Yeah, Ja has a more outward personality than De'Aaron Fox. In the little that I have, I've talked with De'Aaron Fox before. He seems to be a very positive, upstanding, good guy. But I will say, it does seem like that Ja is the more outward personality. On the court, you can see it on social media as well, and things like that. And that's not a knock towards either one of them. De'Aaron Fox is who he is, and his personality should be what it is for him to be the type of player as good as he is. With Ja Morant, you see the more outward expressions of competitiveness, confidence, passion, whatever you want to call it. Now, here's where I think that the narrative starts to get interesting for both players, Matt. Because when you match their games with Ja's personality, you start to see the narrative around Ja being, well, hey, you got to feel confident. He's going to be a multiple-time All-NBA player. He's going to be in the MVP conversation in a few years. And if that doesn't wind up being the case for him, is it a bit of a disappointment? Whereas with De'Aaron, you may not have that personality. You may not have as much of a clear narrative. But if he makes All-NBA runs or maybe an MVP once or twice, it's a surprise. I think that their personalities play a bit into that. And so that's where I think that you start to set the narrative aside. And this is the other point I want to get into with you, is that I do not think it is a disappointment at all if 2 years from now you see Ja scoring like De'Aaron Fox does. But if you're saying that Ja Morant is De'Aaron Fox 2 years from now, I can see people being disappointed because there is a higher expectation of Ja. With how the Grizzlies have played, with what was expected of Ja coming into being the savior of a franchise right from the start when Memphis drafted him, I think that's what stands out, and their personalities feed into that. So whether it's a positive or a negative, that's to debate another time. But I do think that their personalities, as well as what was expected of them at the start of both of their careers, that's where we start to differ. I think more is expected of Ja earlier on in his career than may be expected of De'Aaron.
And see, that's where I think you being in Memphis and covering Memphis versus me being in Sacramento, that's where we're just going to differentiate, because Fox was looked at the exact same way, even more so in the sense that Fox has been looked at a savior of a franchise that has been terrible for over a decade, versus Ja Morant was a savior of a franchise that just a few years ago had their grit and grind and had their identity and have been trying to come back with that. So, but again, that's just market bias. And of course, I'm not going to know that much about Memphis. You're not going to know that much about Sacramento. I think you're 100% correct on personality wise, that Ja does have more of that kind of outward alpha personality than now. De'Aaron has the competitiveness, and De'Aaron will challenge Ja to be the alpha if the two are on the same team together. But outwardly, I agree with you there. Where I kind of, I guess, disagree, but agree in a sense is, like, I would be surprised if either De'Aaron Fox or Ja Morant got to the MVP level, but I wouldn't be surprised if Ja Morant and De'Aaron Fox, by the end of their careers, assuming they spend most of their careers, if not all of their careers, with their respective teams, if Fox is the best Sacramento King or upwards of the best Sacramento King of all time, and Ja Morant is upwards of the best Memphis Grizzlies player of all time, to where both their jerseys are hung up in their arenas by the end of their careers. That's where I would not be surprised with those two players. And I think that's the expectation for each fan base for those two players.
Yeah, and that's where I think, and this is the question that I wanted to ask you, Matt, if that's all right, is that the next level when it comes to these two teams. Obviously, you can make the argument. I think the Kings probably have a better argument of saying we've had talent on De'Aaron Fox's level before. With Memphis, we've not had a natural talent like Ja Morant. But where do these two players fit on a championship roster that Kings fans and Grizzlies fans hope eventually come to their home cities? In an era where we're starting to see the all-time greats start to age a bit, you might be seeing it be more of complete teams than these one uber do-it-all wings. You got Luka still, but you may not see as many LeBrons, Kawhis, and all that. Where do Ja and De'Aaron fit as a 1 or a 2 or a 3 on a championship contender? I think that becomes a question as well. I think for both De'Aaron and Ja, they're going to have to get their shot better from distance to truly, at least at times, being the one on a championship team. But I also think you could see both of them assume a role in time like Trae Young had, and Trae Young's better than both right now on a championship roster. What are your thoughts on that? I don't ever know if Ja or De'Aaron can be a clear number 1 on a championship roster, but I could see both of them being a 1B at the very least. Times can assume the role of a 1A on a title contender.
I think it's an excellent question. I think both can be 1As, but a lot of the outside shot and that scoring, takeover scoring ability has to be more consistent. I agree with that 100%. Championship seems like such a long ways away, but I think if you were to pull 100 NBA fans that had no rooting interest in either the Grizzlies or the Kings, I think the majority would say that they think that Ja Morant has the ability to be the star on a championship team more than De'Aaron Fox has, because they have seen Ja Morant put up 30 points on that stage. That's where I say, and this is my personal feelings on this. I have no stats or anything to back this up. It's just my personal feeling. And I pray we finally get the opportunity to see it this upcoming season. If De'Aaron Fox gets the stage that Ja Morant got last year, he is going to change people's minds. Because I have seen a ton of people, I've seen talking heads, heard talking heads, seen on NBA TV, people saying, I don't think De'Aaron Fox can be, like you said, a 1A guy on a championship team. I don't know if he can be the best player on a championship team. Now, again, from a Sacramento perspective, championship seems way far away. Let's just get to the freaking playoffs first for the first time in over a decade before we start talking about championships. But once the Kings do get to the playoffs, that's where people are going to see, oh God, De'Aaron Fox is for real. And if Fox were playing in LA, if Fox were playing in Miami, if Fox were playing in Chicago, everybody would be talking about him way more than they are now because Fox plays in Sacramento. And that's more of how this organization and this city is kind of holding him back a little bit. But once Fox gets that stage, he is going to absolutely shine. Just like it doesn't surprise me at all that when Ja got that stage, he is going to shine, or he did shine. And if Ja gets an actual 7-game series stage, he's going to shine even more. That's the best compliment I can give to both players.
So then what I hear you saying, and I agree with everything that you're saying, is that in the time frame that we see this year, the hope is that if the Kings probably get to the level that they've been trying to get for a few years, the Grizzlies stay on their level, Matt, we may have a play-in game scenario.
Absolutely.
We may have an elimination game scenario here. So the thing that happens is what are we going to wager at that point? Number one, we've got to wager that the other has to admit, like you'll have to admit Ja's better than De'Aaron. I'll have to admit De'Aaron's better than Ja, at least at that point in time. And in my case, you're also, because I know that your sport interests go outside of the Kings, you're going to have to admit I am the more passionate soccer fan than you as well.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm going to have to, yeah. Oh, we both can agree the U.S. men's national team has been disappointing so far. Pulisic is the engine that drives the team that could. He's got to be good for the CONCACAF and all that different stuff going on. I'll admit you probably are more knowledgeable, but you're going to have to admit, number one, that I'm the more passionate soccer fan, and number two, Zinedine Zidane is the greatest soccer player of all time. You didn't expect that name to be dropped, did you? You did.
I did not, but consider it a bet, Shawn. And I will say this: if we get a play-in round between both teams, which I would love if we could shoot higher and get an actual playoff series somehow. Let's say the Kings end up being 7 and the Grizzlies are 6, and somehow it turns out that we get a 7-game series, like both teams advance. I don't know how the hell that would work, or if that's even possible. Maybe it's even a Western Conference Finals between the two teams. We can all dream, right? But if we get a play-in round, a play-in game between both teams, I don't want to waste time right now and say who has the advantage. I don't even need to go back and say, oh, Fox is one more, the individual. Screw that. All I'm going to say is the biggest winners in that scenario are NBA fans, because that game and just the battle between Fox and Morant on that stage would be like, those two would steal the show. Even if the Grizzlies won and Kings fans are disappointed, or vice versa, the battle between those two would absolutely steal the show, no doubt in my mind.
The other thing about it is that stands out to me as well, Matt, is that when it comes to us having fun with this conversation and debating who's better, not even debating, but just talking about who's better, one thing that certainly comes out of this is two things. Number one, smaller markets get more respect for some of the best talents in the NBA that they can feature, that are the best players on their team. That benefits the smaller markets. And we're seeing smaller markets continue to see their importance rise with Giannis's great season and finally winning the title that we saw last year. But the depth of stars in the NBA also continues to raise as we go into a new era where you may start to see a lot more frequent change of who the best top 5 players or face of the league is over the next generation of NBA stars than there were this year. So the more opportunity you get to see these matchups of De'Aaron Fox and Ja, Trey and Ja on national stages, whatever it may be, that is certainly a good thing for not only smaller markets, but also the NBA in general. Couldn't agree with you more.
Well, in the end, Shawn, it sounds like you're sticking with Ja. It sounds like I'm sticking with De'Aaron Fox. No surprise there, but still a great conversation. Fun to see how similar these players are in a lot of ways. It's going to be fun to watch these players. I think the best thing that we can hope for is that Ja remains a Grizzly for a long time and Fox remains a King for a long time, so that we see these talents doing what they can do for a small market versus taking their talents elsewhere. And then we have to sit with the pains of what could have been. But a great conversation with you, Shawn. I look forward to having you back on. We need to do another crossover pod before the Kings and Grizzlies meet, or maybe even after the Kings and Grizzlies play for the first time this upcoming season, because we expect those games to be a lot of fun. And maybe we're having a completely different conversation. One player certainly stands out more than the other in a lot more of a way by the end of next season than they do right now. I appreciate the conversation, my friend. So what do you think? De'Aaron Fox versus Ja Morant. Who are you taking? Who do you think is better? Who would you start your franchise with? I think the majority of you listening to Locked On Kings are going to choose De'Aaron Fox, but I hope this conversation gave you maybe a bigger appreciation for Ja Morant and just how close these players are. And like I said there, towards the end of my conversation with Shawn, we would be absolute winners. We would be blessed, really, to get a playoff series between the Kings and the Grizzlies just to see those two go at it. But like I told Shawn, when Fox, not if, when Fox gets the stage that Ja Morant got in the play-in tournament last season, he is going to outshine Ja and Ja's performance. That 30-point performance is going to be nothing compared to what De'Aaron Fox does on that stage, his first opportunity. I almost guarantee it. So if you want to write this down, mark the date, say that I said that. When it actually happens, do not be surprised, because I know De'Aaron is absolutely going to shine on that stage, and I expect Ja Morant to continue to shine on that stage. But when the Kings and the Grizzlies meet this upcoming season, I expect the Kings to still be successful. I still think De'Aaron Fox will get the best of Ja Morant. So weigh in your thoughts on this conversation. You can reach me on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or you can leave your comments down below. And I know Grizzlies fans are watching this as well. So Kings fans, Grizzlies fans, debate down below which player is better. Keep it friendly, keep it PG, keep it clean, and let's have some fun with it, because these are two very fun players to watch, fun players to compare. And I look forward to seeing both of their careers continue in the coming seasons. That'll do it for today's episode of Locked On Kings. I appreciate you joining me for all the content this week. Please join me next week for more Locked On Kings content as we get one step closer to the start of the 2021-2022 season. More guests, more great coverage coming your way, so be sure to stick around for that. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.